Could the dusty corners of a medieval convent hide a secret world of dazzling artistry? What if the women behind those cloistered walls weren't just praying and tending gardens, but transforming the most basic objects of their daily lives into masterpieces that would astonish you even today, centuries later, from the 6th to the 16th century? Number 11. The humble book. Think about a book you own today. It is probably printed, mass-produced, and perhaps even digital. Now transport yourself back to a time when every single book was a unique creation, born from painstaking labor. In medieval convents, books were not mere sources of information. They were sacred objects, vessels for divine words, and the nuns who made them treated them with reverence and skill that would astound you. These books, known as illuminated manuscripts, were among the most magnificent creations of the Middle Ages. The process began with the parchment. Animal skins, usually from calves, sheep, or goats, were meticulously prepared. The skins were cleaned, soaked, stretched on frames, and scraped repeatedly with a curved knife called a lunellum until they were incredibly thin, smooth, and translucent. This preparation alone required immense patience and strength. The result was a writing surface, far more durable and luxurious than paper. Each sheet was then cut to size and bound into quires, which would eventually form the book. Then came the scribes, often nuns themselves, who would carefully copy the text. This was not a quick task. Each letter was formed with a quill pen, usually made from a goose feather, dipped in ink. The ink itself was crafted from various natural sources, such as oak galls for black ink, or even crushed insects for red. The script, often Gothic, minuscule, or Carolingian, was precise and uniform, a testament to years of dedicated practice. A single page could take hours, and an entire book, sometimes hundreds of pages long, could take months or even years to complete. But copying was just the beginning. The true transformation came with the illumination. This is where the books burst into vibrant life. Nuns, often specializing in this art, would apply pigments, gold and silver, to decorate the pages. These pigments were derived from minerals, plants, and even precious stones. For instance, lapis lazuli, a valuable blue stone imported from Afghanistan, was ground into a fine powder to create the brilliant ultramarine blue used in the most lavish manuscripts. Vermilion red came from mercury sulfide, and vibrant greens from copper. Each pigment had to be carefully prepared, ground with a mortar and pestle, and mixed with a binder like egg yolk or gum arabic to create a stable paint. The artistry was not limited to just text. The margins of the pages would be filled with intricate borders, featuring swirling vines, delicate flowers, and fantastical creatures. Initial letters, the first letter of a chapter or paragraph, were often enlarged and elaborately decorated, sometimes filling a quarter of the page with their beauty. These historiated initials might contain tiny scenes depicting biblical events or even everyday convent life. Tiny human figures, animals, and mythological beasts would often peek out from behind the foliage, offering glimpses of humor or deeper symbolism. Gold leaf, pounded to an almost impossibly thin sheet, was applied to the parchment using a gilder's cushion and knife. The surface was prepared with gesso, a mixture of gypsum and glue, which created a raised base. The gold was then pressed onto the gesso, and once dry, burnished with an agate stone to achieve a dazzling shine. This was a technique that required absolute precision. A single breath in the wrong direction could ruin the delicate gold leaf. The shimmering gold caught the candlelight, making the pages appear to glow. The subjects of these illuminations varied. Many were religious texts, such as Bibles, Psalters, and books of hours, which contained prayers and liturgical texts for daily devotion. Nuns would create images of saints, Christ, and the Virgin Mary, often depicting them with intense emotional depth. They also illustrated moralizing tales, scientific treatises, and even music. The visual narratives within these books served as teaching tools, devotional aids, and objects of profound beauty, reflecting the spiritual intensity of their creators. A nun named Gouda, working in a convent in the 12th century, is known for including a self-portrait within one of her illuminated manuscripts. This was a rare practice, and her inscription declares, "Gouda, a sinful woman, wrote and painted this book." Such personal touches provide a fascinating glimpse into the lives of these artists. Other famous examples include the work of the nuns at the Abbey of Quedlinburg, who produced richly decorated liturgical books. The skills passed down through generations of nuns ensured the continuity of this demanding and beautiful art form. The completed book was then bound often in wooden boards covered with leather, sometimes adorned with precious jewels or metalwork. The creation of a single illuminated manuscript was a communal effort, involving scribes, illuminators, binders, and even the gardeners who might cultivate plants for pigment. Each step, from the initial scraping of the skin to the final burnishing of the gold, was an act of devotion and artistic dedication. These books were not just read. They were admired, cherished, and used as focal points for spiritual contemplation. Their beauty was intended to elevate the mind and soul towards the divine. Number 10. The simple linen. For medieval nuns, linen was an everyday necessity. It was the fabric of their coifs, their undergarments, their simple habits, and the household textiles they used daily. But this humble fiber, woven from flax, became a canvas for extraordinary artistry, particularly in the form of embroidered altar cloths and vestments. These were not just functional items. They were transformed into dazzling statements of devotion and communal identity. The journey of linen began in the fields. Flax plants were grown, harvested, and then processed through a laborious series of steps, retting, scutching, and hackling, to separate the fibers. These fibers were then spun into thread on a spinning wheel or with a drop spindle, a task often performed by the nuns themselves or by lay sisters. The spun thread was then woven on a loom into plain linen cloth. This fabric, typically undyed and unadorned, was the starting point for a stunning transformation. Once the plain linen was prepared, it was ready for the embroiderer's needle. Nuns were highly skilled in this craft, often developing intricate techniques that were passed down through generations within the convent walls. Their embroidery was not simply decorative stitching, it was a form of painting with thread, creating elaborate narratives and symbolic designs. Altar cloths were paramount in convent life. They covered the altar during Mass, a sacred space where the Eucharist was celebrated. These cloths needed to be not only pristine, but also beautiful, reflecting the sanctity of the ritual. Nuns would meticulously embroider these linens with religious iconography, such as scenes from the life of Christ, images of saints, or Marian symbols. The central panel of an altar cloth might depict the Last Supper or the crucifixion rendered in painstaking detail. The threads used for embroidery were often spun from silk, wool, or even precious metals. Silk threads provided a shimmering, vibrant quality, while wool offered a thicker, more textured feel. Gold and silver threads, made by wrapping fine strips of metal around a silk core, added an unparalleled richness and luminosity to the designs. These metallic threads caught the light, making the embroidered figures appear to glow, especially in the flickering candlelight of the chapel. The stitches employed by the nuns were numerous and varied. Opus Anglicanum, or English work, was a particularly renowned technique characterized by its intricate couching and split stitch, creating a smooth, painted effect. Other stitches included chain stitch, satin stitch, stem stitch, and various types of knot stitches. Each stitch contributed to the texture and visual depth of the design. Faces and hands of figures were often rendered with particular delicacy, using tiny, closely spaced stitches to convey expression and realism, Color was a vital element in these textile masterpieces. Dyes were derived from natural sources, such as woad for blues, madder for reds, weld for yellows, and insect cochineal for brilliant crimson. Nuns would often cultivate dye plants in their convent gardens, or they would purchase prepared threads. The vibrant palette brought the stories and figures to life, communicating theological concepts to a largely illiterate congregation. Choice of colors often held symbolic meaning, for instance, blue for purity, red for sacrifice, or gold for divine glory. Vestments, the garments worn by priests during religious services, also received this lavish treatment. Chasubles, copes, stoles, and maniples were often made from luxurious silks and velvets, and then heavily embroidered by nuns. Cope, a large semicircular cloak, might be adorned with multiple medallions depicting different saints or scenes from the Gospels. The sheer weight of the embroidery, with its metal threads and dense stitching, could make these garments quite heavy, but their beauty was undeniable. Beyond religious textiles, nuns also embroidered domestic linens, although these were often less elaborate. Towels, shrouds, and even simple habits might feature small personal monograms, delicate floral motifs, or symbolic patterns. These touches elevated the ordinary, infusing everyday objects with artistry and personal care. Creation of such beautiful textiles was a highly valued skill within the convent. It provided a means of self-sufficiency, a contribution to the liturgy, and an outlet for creative expression within the confines of monastic life. The long hours spent on these detailed embroideries were considered a form of meditation and devotion. Each stitch was an act of prayer, a physical manifestation of faith. The work was often communal, with several nuns working together on a single large piece, fostering a sense of shared purpose and spiritual unity. These embroidered linens, from the grandest altar cloths to the most intimate personal items, are a testament to the immense skill and profound spiritual dedication of medieval nuns. Their quiet needles transformed simple thread and fabric into enduring works of art. Number 9. The plain wooden box. A wooden box, in its simplest form, is just a container. It holds things, protects them, keeps them organized. But in the hands of medieval nuns, these unassuming objects underwent a remarkable artistic metamorphosis, becoming not just functional storage but intricately carved and painted caskets, reliquaries, and even devotional aids. The journey of the wooden box began with the timber. Woods like oak, pine, maple, or walnut were commonly used, chosen for their durability and availability. The wood was carefully cut, planed, and joined to form the basic structure of the box. This initial carpentry was often done by lay brothers or skilled craftsmen outside the convent, but the artistic transformation was a task that fell to the nuns themselves. Once the basic wooden form was ready, the nuns began their work. Carving was a primary method of adornment. Using small chisels, gouges, and knives, they would meticulously incise patterns and figures into the wooden surfaces. The designs often drew inspiration from religious themes. A box might feature carvings of Christ, the Virgin Mary, or various saints. Scenes from the Bible, such as the Annunciation or the Nativity, were also common motifs, rendered in relief, where figures emerged slightly from the background. Beyond religious narrative, geometric patterns were frequently employed. Interlacing lines, rosettes, stars, and abstract designs would cover the lids and sides of the boxes. These patterns were not merely decorative. They often held symbolic meaning or were simply valued for their intricate beauty. Floral motifs, stylized leaves, and fantastical creatures also found their way onto these carved surfaces, reflecting the natural world around the convent or the imaginative realm of medieval bestiaries. Texture created by carving added depth and tactile interest to the boxes. Play of light and shadow across the raised and recessed areas enhanced the visual appeal. Carving process itself was slow and demanded steady hands, keen eyesight, and immense patience. It was a skill that required years to master, often taught within the convent from experienced sisters to novices. After carving, painting further enhanced the beauty of the boxes. The wooden surfaces were often gessoed first, a layer of plaster-like material applied to create a smooth, even ground for the paint. Pigments, similar to those used in illuminated manuscripts, were prepared from minerals and plants, then mixed with binders to create vibrant paints. Colors such as red, blue, green, and gold were commonly used to highlight the carved details or to paint over flat surfaces. Sometimes, the boxes were gilded. Gold leaf was applied to specific areas, such as the halos of saints or the borders of scenes, making these elements stand out with a dazzling shimmer. Contrast between the rich gold and the painted or natural wood created a striking visual effect, elevating the box from a simple container to a precious object. Many of these decorated wooden boxes served as reliquaries. Reliquaries were special containers designed to hold sacred relics, such as bones of saints, fragments of holy garments, or other objects associated with religious figures. These boxes were not just storage. They were revered objects, believed to hold spiritual power. Nuns would create reliquaries with immense care, reflecting the sanctity of their contents. These reliquaries were often placed on altars or in special chapel niches, where they became focal points for veneration. Other wooden boxes might have been used for personal devotion, holding prayer beads, small religious texts, or other cherished items. Some were designed as small caskets for storing jewelry or other personal treasures. The artistry applied to these personal boxes made them unique and intimately connected to their owners. Even simple boxes used for storing herbs or medicinal preparations in the convent infirmary might feature small, charming painted designs, transforming the mundane into something lovely. Creation of these adorned wooden boxes was not just an artistic endeavor. It was an act of devotion. Each cut of the chisel, each stroke of the brush, was performed with a sense of purpose and spiritual dedication. Quiet rhythm of carving and painting allowed nuns to engage in contemplative work, expressing their faith through tangible beauty. These boxes stand as a testament to the skill and artistry of medieval nuns, transforming a common wooden object into a profound vessel of faith and beauty. Number 8. The everyday spoon. A spoon is a utensil for eating, a simple tool that facilitates daily sustenance. In the medieval world, spoons were often carved from wood or cast from humble metals like pewter. Yet, within convent walls, these utilitarian objects were often elevated through intricate carving and careful adornment, transforming them into small works of art, reflecting the nuns' dedication to beauty in every aspect of their lives. Wooden spoons were particularly common. They were inexpensive to produce and easily spoons were particularly common. They were inexpensive to produce and easily expume. Process began with selecting the right type of wood, such as boxwood, sycamore, or fruit woods, known for their fine grain and suitability for carving. The wood was cut, shaped, and then painstakingly carved by hand. Nuns, often with access to small carving tools like knives and gouges, would begin to transform the plain wood into something more elaborate. The bowls of the spoons might remain relatively plain for practical use, but the handles offered ample opportunity for artistic expression. These handles were often carved with intricate designs. Common motifs included geometric patterns, such as interlacing knots or abstract swirling lines. Floral designs, representing flowers like lilies or roses, were also popular, symbolizing purity or spiritual love. Animal figures, both real and fantastical, might adorn the very end of the handle, offering a touch of whimsy or symbolic meaning. Religious symbols were frequently incorporated. Cross, a small figure of a saint, or a delicate depiction of the Virgin Mary could be carved into the handle turning the everyday act of eating into a moment of subtle spiritual reflection. Sometimes initials or monograms, perhaps representing a specific nun or the convent itself, were carved into the wood, personalizing the object. The carving was not simply superficial. It involved creating depth and texture, allowing the hand to feel the intricate details. The smoothness of the polished wood contrasted with the delicate ridges of the carved patterns. Once carved, the spoons were often polished with fine sand or rushes to create a smooth, tactile surface, sometimes rubbed with oil or beeswax to preserve the wood and enhance its natural beauty. Beyond carving, some wooden spoons might have been decorated with a technique known as pyrography, where designs were burned into the wood using heated metal tools. This created dark, precise lines and patterns that stood in stark contrast to the lighter wood. Though less common than carving, it offered another avenue for detailed decoration. Metal spoons, typically made from pewter or lead, were less common for elaborate individual artistic transformation by nuns compared to wooden ones, as their production involved casting rather than carving. However, if the nuns had access to a workshop with metalworking tools, they might have added simple engravings or small decorative elements to their metal spoons. More often, the metal spoons were adorned through the initial casting process, perhaps featuring simple molded designs on the handle or a slightly more elaborate finial. Nuns would mostly focus on the wooden ones, which allowed for more direct hand carving. The transformation of a simple spoon into an adorned object was an act that permeated daily life with beauty, spoke to the monastic ideal of infusing every moment and every object with spiritual meaning. A spoon was not just a tool for eating. It was a small, personal piece of art, a reminder of the maker's skill and devotion. In the refectory, where nuns gathered for meals, these decorated spoons would have been subtle yet significant elements, reflecting the value placed on craftsmanship and beauty even in the most mundane aspects of existence. The creation of such objects also provided a practical skill. Nuns often had to be resourceful, making and mending many of their own tools and domestic items. The ability to carve, to transform a simple piece of wood into something both functional and beautiful, was a valuable asset within the convent community, contributed to the convent's self-sufficiency, and demonstrated a deep appreciation for the materials they used and the objects they created. These everyday spoons, though small, represent a significant aspect of medieval nun artistry, showing how even the most ordinary items could be touched by grace and transformed by skilled hands. Number 7. The clay pot. Clay pot? It held water, stored grain, cooked stew. It was in essence the very definition of utilitarian. But in the hands of medieval nuns, particularly in regions where pottery was a common craft, these humble vessels were elevated beyond mere function. They were adorned with patterns, textures, and even painted designs, transforming them into objects that held both practical utility and surprising artistic charm. The process of making a clay pot began with the earth itself. Nuns, or those working under their direction, would collect specific types of clay, often found near riverbeds or in special clay pits. The clay had to be carefully prepared, cleaned of impurities like stones and organic matter, then kneaded or wedged to remove air bubbles and create a uniform consistency. This preparatory work was crucial for preventing cracks during firing. Once the clay was prepared, it was shaped. This was typically done on a potter's wheel, a device that allowed for the rapid and symmetrical formation of vessels. The potter would center a lump of clay on the wheel and, using a combination of hand pressure and centrifugal force, coax the clay upwards and outwards into the desired form: a jar, a bowl, a pitcher, or a plate. The rhythmic motion of the wheel and the feel of the clay were central to the craft. For nuns, this manual work often combined practical necessity with contemplative repetition. After the basic form was thrown, the artistic transformation began. while some monastic potteries focused purely on sturdy, unadorned vessels for basic needs. Many others incorporated decorative elements. One common technique was incising. While the clay was still damp and pliable, designs were scratched or carved into the surface using simple tools like sticks, bone slivers, or even fingernails. These incisions could range from simple horizontal bands and wavy lines to more complex geometric patterns. Another method of adornment was stamping. Small stamps, carved from wood, bone, or unfired clay, were pressed into the soft surface of the pot, creating repetitive patterns. These stamps might feature rosettes, crosses, circles, or abstract motifs. The regular repetition of a stamped pattern around the rim or body of a pot created a pleasing visual rhythm. Sometimes different stamps were combined to form more elaborate borders or decorative fields. Applied decoration was also used. This involved adding small pieces of clay to the surface of the pot. Coils of clay could be attached to create raised patterns, or small sculpted elements such as tiny rosettes or stylized figures could be applied. These additions provided tactile interest and visual richness to the surface, while firing in a kiln would turn the soft clay into durable ceramic. Some pots were also decorated with slip or paint before firing. Slip is a mixture of clay and water, often colored with mineral pigments. It could be applied by dipping the entire pot or by painting designs directly onto the surface. This created a contrasting color layer. For example, a red clay pot might be coated with a white slip and then scratched through to reveal the red beneath, a technique known as sgraffito. Or different colored slips could be painted onto the surface to create more complex patterns. After firing, some pots might receive a glaze. Glazes were glassy coatings, often lead-based, that were applied to the surface and then fired again at a higher temperature. This created a non-porous, often shiny, finish that made the pots more durable and easier to clean. Glazes could also be colored, adding another layer of aesthetic appeal to the vessels. While many medieval pots were unglazed or simply salt glazed, some convent workshops might have produced glazed ware. The designs found on these medieval pots often reflected the regional artistic traditions and the specific needs of the convent. Some patterns might be symbolic, such as crosses or fish, hinting at religious meaning. Others were purely aesthetic, enhancing the everyday object with pleasing forms and textures. These pots would have been used for a variety of purposes within the convent: for serving food in the refectory, for storing preserves in the pantry, for holding water in cells, or for preparing medicines in the infirmary. The act of shaping and decorating clay was a meditative and practical skill, connected the nuns directly to the earth and its resources. The finished pots, even the most basic ones, bore the marks of human hands and the subtle artistry applied. They served as a constant, tangible reminder that even the most mundane objects could be imbued with care and beauty, reflecting the monastic ideal of infusing sacredness into all aspects of life. The clay pot, transformed by the hands of medieval nuns, became a testament to their quiet creativity and their ability to elevate the ordinary. Number 6. The candle. A candle, for most, is a simple source of light, a wax cylinder with a wick. In the flickering gloom of medieval convents, candles were essential for reading, prayer, and illuminating sacred spaces. But nuns often transformed these basic illuminants into objects of surprising beauty, adorning them with color, scent, and sometimes even carved details, making them not just functional, but truly devotional art. The primary material for medieval candles was beeswax. Unlike tallow, which was made from animal fat and often produced a smoky, malodorous flame, beeswax burned cleanly and emitted a pleasant, subtle fragrance. Nuns would often keep their own bees harvesting the wax from their beehives. This natural beeswax provided the raw material for their candles. The wax was melted, purified, and then shaped. The simplest method of candle making involved repeatedly dipping a wick, typically made of twisted linen or hemp fibers, into molten wax until the desired thickness was achieved. This dipping process was laborious, but allowed for precise control over the candle's form. Alternatively, molten wax could be poured into molds, though this was less common for simple everyday candles, and more often used for larger, more elaborate altar candles. Once the basic candle form was created, the nuns began their artistic transformation. Color was a key element. While many candles remained their natural, creamy yellow of beeswax, some were dyed. Pigments derived from natural sources, such as madder for red, weld for yellow, or indigo for blue, could be added to the molten wax coloring the entire candle. These colored candles were especially significant for liturgical use, where specific colors might symbolize different feast days or liturgical seasons. Beyond solid color, candles were often adorned with painted designs. Using fine brushes and pigments mixed with a binder compatible with wax, nuns would paint delicate patterns directly onto the candle's surface. These designs often included religious symbols, such as crosses, lilies, or crowns. Scriptural verses, monograms of Christ or Mary, or even small stylized figures of saints might be meticulously painted along the candle's length. Painting required a steady hand and a light touch, as the wax surface could be delicate. Sometimes, candles were decorated with applied wax ornaments. Nuns would warm small pieces of colored wax and sculpt them into tiny flowers, leaves, or geometric shapes, then carefully press them onto the candle's body. These raised decorations added texture and a three-dimensional quality to the candles for larger, more important candles. Particularly those used on the altar, the wax might even be intricately carved or molded into elaborate forms, such as twisting columns or figures, before or after the main structure was set. Scent was another subtle but significant transformation. While beeswax itself had a natural honey-like aroma, nuns would sometimes add essential oils derived from plants grown in their convent gardens. Lavender, rosemary, frankincense, or myrrh could be incorporated into the molten wax, imbuing the candles with a beautiful fragrance that would be released as they burned. This added an olfactory dimension to the visual and spiritual experience. The scent contributed to the atmosphere of prayer and contemplation within the chapel or individual cell. The most impressive candles were often those used for special feast days or processions. These could be very large, elaborately painted, and adorned with multiple layers of wax ornamentation. Paschal candle, used during the Easter season, was a prime example of such a monumental creation, often featuring intricate designs that symbolized Christ's resurrection. Nuns would dedicate significant time and skill to crafting these important liturgical objects. The transformation of a simple candle into an adorned object was a deeply devotional act. Each painted symbol, each added scent, was intended to enhance the spiritual atmosphere and draw the user closer to prayer. The flickering light of these decorated candles illuminated not only the physical space, but also the spiritual intentions of their makers. The act of creating and lighting these candles was a testament to the belief that beauty should permeate every aspect of sacred and daily life. Quiet artistry of medieval nuns brought light and grace to the darkness, transforming the everyday candle into a glowing testament of faith. Number 5. The hair comb. A comb is a simple implement for grooming, a tool to manage hair. In the medieval period, combs were often made from wood or bone, utilitarian objects essential for daily hygiene. Yet within convents, these practical items were frequently transformed by the artistry of nuns through carving, inlay, and even polishing, turning them into elegant personal accessories that reflected both function and quiet beauty. The primary materials for medieval combs were wood, particularly boxwood or animal bone, typically from cattle. These materials were chosen for their durability and their ability to be finely worked. The process began with cutting the chosen material into a rectangular blank. Then, the teeth of the comb were meticulously sawn or carved. This was a precise and often delicate task, especially for fine-toothed combs used for removing lice or for very smooth hair. Once the basic comb shape and teeth were formed, the artistic transformation began. Carving was the most common method of adornment. The back of the comb, the part opposite the teeth, offered a flat surface for decoration. Nuns, often skilled in fine carving, would incise elaborate designs into the bone or wood. These designs could range from simple geometric patterns, like interlocking circles or diamond shapes, to more complex scrollwork and interlacing knots. Floral motifs were also popular, depicting stylized leaves, vines, or delicate flowers. These natural elements often conveyed symbolic meaning, such as purity or growth. Animal figures, birds, or small fantastical creatures might also be carved, adding a touch of personality or symbolic protection to the comb. Religious symbols, such as crosses or small depictions of saints, were occasionally incorporated, particularly for combs used for personal devotion or as gifts. Carving was performed with small, sharp tools, requiring immense precision and a steady hand. The depth and intricacy of the carving varied, from shallow incisions that created subtle patterns to deeper relief work that added tactile texture. Once carved, the comb was often polished to a smooth, lustrous finish. For bone combs, this involved extensive rubbing with abrasive materials, and then buffing to bring out a subtle sheen. For wooden combs, oils or waxes might be applied to enhance the wood's natural grain and protect the carving. Inlay was another technique used to adorn more precious combs. This involved cutting small pieces of a contrasting material such as darker wood, bone, or even tiny pieces of metal or ivory, and fitting them into recesses carved into the comb's surface. This created intricate patterns and designs with contrasting colors and textures. For instance, a light bone comb might feature dark wood inlays, creating a striking visual contrast. This technique was highly skilled and labor-intensive. While many combs were personal items, some might have been part of a set of grooming tools or given as gifts within the monastic community. Creation of such objects was not just about utility. It was about elevating the everyday through skilled craftsmanship. It reflected a monastic ideal that beauty and order should be present even in the simplest, most personal objects. The act of making these combs was also a contemplative practice. The meticulous nature of carving, the repeated motions of shaping and polishing, allowed for a quiet focus, a form of active meditation. It was a skill that contributed to the self-sufficiency of the convent, as nuns could produce their own necessities and sometimes even create items for sale or exchange with other religious houses. These adorned combs, though perhaps small and often overlooked in historical records, are fascinating examples of the discreet artistry practiced by medieval nuns. They demonstrate how skill, patience, and a desire for beauty could transform a mundane implement into a small, cherished object of personal artistry. The hair comb, once just a tool, became a testament to the unseen artistry of medieval nuns, reflecting a life where even the simplest actions were imbued with care and creativity. Number 4. The spindle whorl. For medieval women, including nuns, spinning thread was an almost constant activity. It was a fundamental part of producing textiles for clothing, linens, and liturgical purposes. The spindle whorl, a small weighted disc attached to the bottom of a spindle, was a crucial tool in this process. While many spindle whorls were plain and purely functional, nuns often transformed these small, humble objects into delicate works of art through carving, engraving, and decoration, infusing beauty into the very act of daily labor. Spindle whorls were typically made from readily available materials: stone, clay, bone, antler, or wood. Choice of material depended on regional availability and specific needs. Stone whorls, often made from steatite or schist, were durable. Clay whorls were common, easily shaped and fired. Bone and antler whorls offered a smooth surface for detailed work. Primary function of the spindle whorl was to provide momentum and weight to the spindle, helping to twist fibers into thread. It needed to be balanced and have a central hole for the spindle shaft. The initial shaping of the whorl, whether by carving stone, molding clay, or cutting bone, was done with precision to ensure its proper function. Once the basic form was achieved, the artistic transformation began. The relatively flat surfaces of the spindle whorl, though small, provided a canvas for intricate decoration. Carving and engraving were common techniques. Using small, sharp tools, nuns would incise patterns into the surface of the whorl. Geometric designs were very popular. Concentric circles, radial lines emanating from the center, spirals, and interlocking patterns were frequently seen. These designs were often symmetrical and aesthetically pleasing, adding visual interest to the spinning motion. Some whorls might feature small dots, lines, or cross-hatching to create texture and highlight certain areas. Symbolic motifs were also incorporated. Cross was a common religious symbol, subtly reminding the spinner of her faith, even during mundane tasks. Stylized floral patterns representing leaves or petals could also be found, connecting the daily labor to the natural world and its inherent beauty. Sometimes, abstract patterns that resembled letters or symbols were carved, though their exact meaning is often lost to time. For clay, whorls designs could be impressed into the wet clay before firing using simple tools or stamps. This created textured surfaces with repetitive patterns. After firing, some clay whorls might have been burnished to a smooth, shiny finish, or even subtly colored with natural pigments. Bone and antler whorls offered a particularly smooth surface for fine engraving. Precise lines created by engraving would stand out against the natural color of the material. Wooden whorls, while perhaps less common for elaborate decoration due to the difficulty of fine carving on some wood types, might still feature simple carved patterns or painted designs. The transformation of a spindle whorl was an intimate form of artistry. It was an object constantly held in the hand, its patterns seen and felt during the continuous motion of spinning. This meant the decoration was not just for display, but for personal contemplation and engagement. The rhythmic hum of the spinning wheel and the turning of the decorated whorl would have been a constant backdrop to convent life, a quiet accompaniment to prayer and work. The creation of these decorated spindle whorls was a testament to the medieval monastic ideal of infusing everyday objects with beauty and meaning. It showcased the nuns' skill in working with various materials and their desire to elevate even the most utilitarian tools. The artistry was not flashy or grand, but subtle and pervasive, bringing a quiet joy and spiritual reflection to the most essential of daily chores. These small decorated discs, often overlooked in the grand scheme of medieval art, tell a powerful story of how even the humble act of spinning could become a conduit for artistic expression and spiritual devotion. Number 3. The decorated veil. For medieval nuns, the veil was more than just a piece of cloth. It was a symbol of their vows, their commitment to God, and their identity within the monastic community. It covered their hair, signaling modesty and spiritual dedication. While often simple and unadorned for daily wear, for special occasions, ceremonies, or as objects of personal devotion, these humble veils underwent a remarkable transformation through intricate embroidery and embellishment, becoming delicate works of art. The material for veils was typically fine linen or wool, chosen for its softness and ability to drape elegantly. The fabric was usually undyed, maintaining a pure white or natural off-white color. The initial creation of the veil involved spinning the fibers and weaving the cloth, tasks that could be performed by nuns themselves or acquired from outside sources. The fabric was then cut and hemmed to the appropriate size and shape. Once the basic veil was prepared, the nuns, with their highly skilled needles, began the process of artistic transformation. Embroidery was the primary method of adornment. Fine silk threads, often in subtle colors like white cream, pale blue, or silver, were used to create delicate patterns. Sometimes, gold or silver metallic threads were incorporated to add a shimmering quality. Catching the light and enhancing the veil's sacred aura, the designs were typically religious or symbolic. Common motifs included small crosses, stylized lilies representing purity, or delicate floral patterns. These patterns were often concentrated around the edges or corners of the veil, creating a subtle border that framed the nun's face or the top of her head. The stitches used were fine and precise, such as satin stitch, stem stitch, or tiny seed stitches, creating a smooth, almost painted effect with the thread. Beyond simple patterns, some veils were embroidered with more complex imagery, especially those intended for ceremonial use or as special gifts. These could include tiny monograms of Christ or Mary, small angels, or even minute scenes from the Bible, rendered with extraordinary detail. The scale of this embroidery was often very small, demanding exceptional eyesight and dexterity from the nuns. Sometimes, pearls or small glass beads were sewn onto the veil, adding a touch of luminosity and preciousness. These tiny adornments were strategically placed to highlight certain areas of the design or to create a delicate sparkle. The addition of such elements transformed the veil from a purely functional item into a precious accessory worn during solemn rituals or important feast days. The embellishment of veils was not merely for aesthetic purposes. It was an act of devotion, a way for the nuns to honor their vows and express their spiritual commitment. Each stitch, each pearl sewn on, was a tangible manifestation of prayer and dedication. The process of creation itself was a meditative practice, providing a quiet outlet for artistic and spiritual expression within the disciplined life of the convent. Coifs, the close-fitting caps worn under the veil, also received similar artistic treatment. While often plain, some coifs might feature subtle embroidery around the forehead or ties, making them unique to the individual nun or for special occasions. These personal touches, though hidden from public view, were part of the private world of monastic beauty. The transformed veil became a deeply personal object for the nun, a tangible representation of her spiritual journey. It was worn daily, becoming an intimate part of her identity. Quiet beauty woven into these linens served as a constant reminder of their sacred purpose and the spiritual transformation of the wearer. These delicate and often unseen works of art represent the profound dedication of medieval nuns who infused even the most intimate aspects of their daily lives with grace and profound meaning. Number 2. The rosary bead. The rosary, a string of beads used to count prayers, became a vital tool for meditation and devotion in medieval Christianity. While often simple and made from wood or bone in the hands of nuns, individual rosary beads and sometimes entire rosaries were transformed through intricate carving, polishing, and thoughtful arrangement, elevating them from mere counters to exquisite, tactile objects of profound spiritual significance. The materials for rosary beads varied widely, but common choices included wood, bone, ivory, jet, and even semi-precious stones. Wood, particularly boxwood, was favored for its fine grain and suitability for carving. Bone, typically from large animals, provided a smooth, durable surface. The process of making a single bead began with shaping the raw material into a sphere, oval, or sometimes a more complex form. This initial shaping required precision to ensure the beads were uniform and comfortable to handle. Once the basic bead shape was formed, the artistic transformation began. Carving was the most common and elaborate method of adornment. Nuns, often possessing exceptional dexterity and fine carving tools, would meticulously incise miniature designs into the surface of the beads. These carvings were incredibly detailed, considering the small size of the beads. Often no larger than a fingertip, the designs were overwhelmingly religious. Many beads featured tiny crosses, symbols of Christ's passion, or monograms of Christ or the Virgin Mary. Some beads were carved with miniature human figures depicting saints, angels, or even scenes from the Gospels. A single bead might show the face of Christ or Mary in delicate relief, requiring immense skill to capture facial expressions in such a small scale. Floral motifs, representing spiritual growth or purity, were also common, often carved in delicate patterns around the circumference of the bead. Geometric designs, interlacing knots, or starburst patterns provided abstract beauty and tactile interest. The depth of the carving could vary, from shallow incisions that created subtle patterns to deeper relief work that made the figures more prominent. For rosaries made from bone or ivory, the natural luster of the material was often enhanced through extensive polishing. The smooth, cool feel of a well-polished bead in the hand added to the contemplative experience of prayer. Sometimes, beads made from different materials or in different colors were strung together to create a visually varied and appealing rosary. For instance, a rosary might alternate between plain wooden beads and intricately carved bone beads, marking the different prayer sections. The stringing of the beads was also an art in itself. Nuns would use strong, durable cords, often made from linen or silk. The arrangement of the beads, with larger Our Father beads and smaller Hail Mary beads, followed a specific pattern that aided in counting the prayers. Sometimes, a crucifix or a small medal, often carved or cast, would be added at the end of the rosary, serving as a focal point for devotion. The creation of these carved rosary beads was a deeply personal and spiritual undertaking. Each cut of the carving tool, each stroke of the polishing cloth, was an act of meditation and devotion. The nuns were creating tools for prayer, objects that would be held and touched countless times, guiding the mind through spiritual reflection. The artistry was not for public display in a grand sense, but for intimate, personal engagement with the divine. Practice of creating and using rosaries flourished in the later medieval period, offering a structured way for both literate and illiterate individuals to engage in devotional prayer. Nuns played a significant role in promoting and producing these objects. Their skilled hands transformed simple materials into conduits for spiritual contemplation, making the everyday act of prayer tangible and beautiful. These adorned rosary beads stand as a testament to the meticulous skill and profound faith of medieval nuns who brought beauty to the very rhythm of devotion. Number 1. The Illustrated Herbarium. Imagine a book, not a book of prayers or stories, but a book dedicated to plants, their properties, and their uses. In medieval convents, where nuns were often the healers and apothecaries for their communities, these herbals were vital, practical texts. But the nuns did not just copy the text. They transformed these functional volumes into captivating works of art through vibrant, detailed illustrations, bridging the gap between scientific observation and stunning artistic expression. Creation of an herbal manuscript began, like other books, with the preparation of parchment. Painstaking process of preparing animal skins ensured a smooth, durable surface for both text and illustration. Text itself detailed plant descriptions, their medicinal applications, and sometimes their magical or symbolic properties. This information was compiled from ancient sources, personal observations, and knowledge passed down to generations. Once the text was copied by a scribe, the artistic transformation began with the illustrations. These were not mere schematic drawings. They were often highly detailed, vibrant depictions of plants. Nuns, often specializing in botanical illustration, would meticulously paint each plant, capturing its leaves, flowers, roots, and fruits with remarkable accuracy. This precision was crucial, as the illustrations served as identification guides for collecting and preparing medicinal plants. Pigments used were derived from natural sources similar to those for other illuminated manuscripts. Greens came from plants like verdigris or malachite, reds from madder or cochineal, yellows from saffron or weld, blues from lapis lazuli or indigo. The nuns would carefully grind and mix these pigments with binders, like egg yolk, to create their paints. Colors were applied in layers, sometimes with delicate shading, to give the plants a three-dimensional quality and lifelike appearance. Beyond the accurate botanical depiction, the illustrations often displayed an artistic flair. Plants were arranged aesthetically on the page, sometimes with a graceful curve of a stem or a delicate placement of leaves. While accuracy was paramount, the nuns also infused the illustrations with a sense of beauty and wonder, reflecting their appreciation for the natural world as God's creation. Sometimes small insects or other tiny creatures would be included in the illustrations, adding to the lifelike quality and demonstrating the interconnectedness of nature. The scale of the illustrations varied. Some might be full-page depictions, touting a single plant in all its glory. Others might be smaller, accompanying the text in the margins or alongside specific descriptions. The illustrations were not just decorative. They were integral to the understanding and use of the herbal. For a nun tasked with gathering specific herbs for a remedy, a clear and accurate illustration was as important as the written description. Nuns often cultivated their own medicinal gardens, providing them with direct access to the plants they illustrate. This first-hand observation allowed for a greater degree of realism and detail in their artwork. They would spend hours studying the plants, understanding their growth patterns, and noting their unique characteristics. This practical knowledge informed their artistic representation. The completed herbals were treasured within the convent, infirmary, and apothecary. They served as vital reference books for preparing salves, poultices, and tinctures for the sick, both within the convent and in the surrounding community. They were also used for teaching novices about the properties of plants. Creation of an illustrated herbal was a demanding and multifaceted undertaking, combining scientific knowledge, practical application, and artistic skill. It demonstrated the nuns' intellectual curiosity, their dedication to healing, and their ability to transform a functional reference work into a visually stunning masterpiece. The act of creating these illustrations was not merely about art. It was about serving their community and glorifying the natural world as a reflection of divine order. These beautifully illustrated herbals stand as a testament to the profound and multifaceted artistry of medieval nuns, who infused even the most practical of texts with enduring beauty and meticulous detail.